नमस्ते। भाषाका कुरामा आज हामी अलि नयाँ प्रसङ्ग लिएर आएका छौँ। यसभन्दा अगाडिका एपिसोडहरूमा हामी नेपाली भाषामा एउटा मात्र पाहुनालाई बोलाएर भाषाको बारेमा कुराकानी गर्ने गर्थ्यौँ। तर यसपटक हामीले एकजना विदेशी पाहुना र एकजना स्वदेशी पाहुना, दुईजना पाहुनाहरूको बिचमा राखेर भाषाकै बारेमा केही हामी छलफल गर्न गइरहेका छौँ। र यो एपिसोडमा सामान्यतया नेपाली भन्दा हाम्रो विदेशी पाहुना बेलायतबाट हुनुहुन्छ, डाक्टर ट्रेसी कस्टले। त्यसो भएको हुनाले म यो कार्यक्रमलाई अङ्ग्रेजीमा सञ्चालन गर्ने अनुमति चाहन्छु। आम पाठक, आम श्रोता र आम दर्शकवृन्दहरूमा वेलकम टु द show of Bhasaka Kura.
Thank you.
And we have Dr. Tracey from the University of Essex, United Kingdom. And Dr. Tracey, to my knowledge, has had extensive experience of language teaching, multilingualism, translanguaging, and the research. To say brief, that Dr. Tracey earned her PhD and various postdoctoral research from various UK university, and she has also received lots of funding from the British Academy, the European Social Research Council, the British Council, UNICEF, and she has conducted research in the UK, Botswana, Taiwan, Tanzania, Zambia, and of course Nepal. Especially in Nepal, she is working in collaboration with UNICEF, Language Commission Nepal, CHRD, Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, UNESCO, and the British Council. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And we have another guest, a Nepali guest, Dr. Prem Poudel. Dr. Prem Poudel is the Assistant Professor of English Language Education at Tribhuvan University. Dr. Poudel earned his PhD in English Language Education, especially focusing on language policy from the Education University of Hong Kong. And he has been working, serving, and researching language in education policy together with me in many publications, in many projects, and together with Dr. Costley. This is the brief introduction about our panelists this morning. I guess I need to begin with Dr. Costley. So, Dr. Costley, can you please share your background of research in language policy in education and multilingualism?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for inviting us here today to talk about some of the things that we're doing. It's a great honour to be here, so thank you for that. So my interest in language policy, I think, really started as a teacher of English. I worked as an English language teacher, teaching children, teaching adults in different international contexts. And I became, I think, interested in how teachers do things, what the policies of schools are, how that shapes what we can do as teachers, and how that shapes what learners do. And in my PhD, when I returned to the UK, I looked at similar things in London. So I was interested in how the ideas of the government, the English government, would then shape what things like literacy and language looked like for the students. And I think that was the beginning of my interest in language policies, really. And then looking at multilingualism in the context of the UK, schools are highly diverse. Yes. There's lots of children or lots of students from different language backgrounds. So multilingualism has been a theme I think in the research that I've been doing since my PhD, really. So we work with teachers in the UK, how they work in schools, so primary schools, secondary schools, also universities, and then I've had experience of working internationally doing similar things.
Yes, one interesting thing is that the UK itself is little bit English language based country. Even there are dialect in the Wales, Scots and others too, Gaelic too as well.
Yeah.
It is not like the case of Nepal where more than 120 languages are spoken and more than 140 ethnicities are there in our context. But I would like to know about your interest in multilingualism. What really...
Yeah, so I'm interested in how, multilingualism as a resource. So it's something that people have, like language is a way to do things. So language being a way to make meaning in different ways with different people. Yeah. So I think if you are multilingual and if you have those abilities to work multilingually, you have the resource to share, to do things across a bigger platform. Yeah, so that's interesting to me. But in a kind of school context, often what we see is that resource isn't always encouraged or used in schools. That often students or teachers are required to be quite monolingual. And so I'm interested in that tension between those two things.
So coming back to Dr. Poudel, as an educator, how have you observed Nepal's multilingualism in education sector?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gautam. It's a pleasure to be here today together with Tracey to talk about Nepal's language policies, language education, and the multilingualism. I grew up in a context where Nepali was the only language and English was taught in school. And my exposure to English was very much, limited within school premises, mostly in the classroom context. But at the same time, I was learning English through the grammar translation method.
At the same time, we started learning ABCD when we were in class 4.
Yeah, and then I started learning, started at grade 4, and my teachers were also bilingual teachers, Nepali, English. And he used to give us like Nepali sentences and ask us to translate into English. I still remember those sentences, very funny sentences and so on. And then when I moved to the university, I started learning English literature and English language teaching resources and so on. And then again, there also like the teaching learning process took place in a similar way. But in the classroom, together with me, there are many other friends who were from other language backgrounds. And they were sometimes trying to understand when we were talking in a group at the library and sometimes in the playground, they're trying to think in 3 different languages. Yeah. For example, they wanted to learn something of English and they asked me in Nepali what this equivalent is, and then they were processing that in their mother tongue. So at that time it touched me, there's another language which is not my language and they are processing information in 3 different layers. So this is where I think is the insight I developed about multilingualism. And when I became an educator, I was teaching in a campus that had students from more than 10 different backgrounds. And one day, what happened? I was teaching linguistics, and then I was sometimes translating into Nepali in case needed. But one time, one Rai student told me, "Sir, what is this called in Rai? And is there any equivalent?" And I don't know Rai, right? And I asked another Rai, "What do you say in Rai language on this particular thing?" Like cluster. He was asking me about cluster, consonant cluster. I was teaching consonant cluster.
Yes.
And Nepali,
consonant cluster.
In Nepali, I said, okay, cluster is this, but he could not catch, For me also, it was difficult to catch. And then later, I didn't have this word, and I asked another Rai student, and like they were interacting, and he understood well. So at that time, I developed kind of insight that, can we make our classrooms more multilingual? Right, and these questions impacted me, and I had one paper published in 2010 on how the multilingual education scenario is going on in higher education. So this is the matter that I was motivated in multilingual things.
Yeah.
And when I started learning those literature about multilingual context, multilingual values, and the benefits of being multilingual and so on, I found that Nepal is a rich place for that. And there are a lot of multilingual activities going on. So it has become a lifeline for Nepalese, I guess. I guess there is no Nepalese now who is totally monolingual. They're either bilingual or mostly multilingual.
Yeah.
So why don't we use those resources to support our students' learning?
Yeah.
Even adults, like my students who were in the bachelor first year, they were adults, but still they were suffering, right? Or trying to cope with this language barrier to enhance their own learning through their own agency. So I think this particular resource that is coming from community to the classroom, I think we should address that. So that's why I develop a kind of perspective, as Tracey also said, that before there were some restrictions for those other languages in the classroom. But I think we have to create an environment where all languages are understood as resources. And it's not only the language matter. I think it is more knowledge. It's more about culture. It's also more about values. So there is no harm in learning other languages than your dominant languages. So this is how I think Nepal's education sector has to address this particular resource.
Yeah.
Of course, we are not that much strong enough to bring all those resources in the classroom because of all this.
But the discourse has already started.
Yeah,
1990s
plus was a fertile time for us to create discourse on multilingualism.
Yeah.
And policies are there in place now. Most of the policies are respecting and addressing multilingualism.
Yeah.
But I think we have to address the practice of this multilingualism. So I think this multilingualism and education sector, they have to have a kind of very close connection and respect to each other, so that we can promote multilingualism. I think this is my observation in Nepal's case.
So Dr. Prem, could I ask you about your research in multilingualism, especially your focus area?
Thank you, Dr. Gautam. Yes, I told you before that I started thinking about these multilingual things around 2009, and I had a paper published in a Nepalese journal in 2010. Then after I started researching in a micro level and little bit macro level. So my PhD was in language policy. I wanted to see how this school's practice of medium of instruction can affect their learning experiences, and how that injustice or inequality or inequity in learning because of language barriers can be minimized. That was my doctoral study.
Yes.
So that doctoral study gave me very broad international scenario of what is going on in other countries.
Yes.
I also understood what is going on in Luxembourg. I also understood what is going on in other countries like UK. I knew people who are working in the language policy discourse and so on. So that further motivated me to do some research in multilingualism based in Nepal. So after PhD, as you were asking me about research, I came to Nepal and I got some connections, and some people approached me for research in language education. And I think Tracey and me in 2023, we conducted a national study in Nepal commissioned by UNICEF, and there are other partners agencies. So I think that was one of the fundamental research recently. Before that, there were many other studies like MILE study and there are policy other studies.
Yes.
And these studies informed us to establish the foundation, and we aided something more on what is going on in the community in a more realistic sense. So we are trying to explore what can be much more practical than what we supposed to be.
So connecting global into the local.
Yeah,
so being local.
Yeah, it was so nice that Tracey had very broad experience and of working in different countries, and I also going to Hong Kong and here. So my local experience of working in Nepal and understanding Nepalese, specificities, and then Tracey's global experience, I think we brought them together through several interactions, and our report has been quite impactful in Nepal's language policy. So this is what the recent study that we did.
Yes, of course. That's very interesting. And Tracey, You mentioned that you worked in several multilingual contexts, not only in the UK, but many countries in Asia and Africa, like Botswana, Tanzania, and others. What are the key learning experience from these countries?
Thank you. Yes, I think there's lots of, while those countries have been quite unique. So one project that I was lucky to be involved in was we were looking at policies in Botswana, Tanzania and Zambia, and how local language practices, whether they were mirrored in schools, whether that's the kind of language that children could use, the students could use, or teachers could use. And we found that even though they were quite different, even though those contexts are quite different, so Zambia, there are similarities with Tanzania, but there are also kind of fundamental differences. But overall, the pattern seems to be quite similar. And I think we have similar findings in Nepal as well, where there's an interest, there's an understanding. People understand that multilingualism is a good thing, and it's a normal, everyday practice. And people don't always think about it because they think, well, this is just what I do. This is the language I use. This is who I talk to. This is how I am. But when it comes to things like classrooms, all of a sudden it changes because people can't be who they are in the same way because the policies or the rules of the classroom kind of change that. And so even though these contexts are all quite different, I think that has been a really similar finding, is that, there's a big change between what happens outside classrooms and inside classrooms. And I'm not sure that's always for good things. Like classrooms are really good spaces. Wonderful things happen in classrooms. Teachers do brilliant jobs. Students do brilliant jobs. We learn interesting things. We do interesting things. So there are always differences between what you do at home and what you do at school. But when it comes to language, I'm not sure that those differences are always really helpful because people feel concerned about their language. And there's lots of shame, I think, often about language that people use, even if it's, at the level of a variety of language. So at the moment in the UK, for example, there's lots of colleagues who are doing research on how teachers are required to promote standard English with students, and not even just at the written level, but also in terms of speaking. And of course, we know that there's no standard English accent, but there's a certain promotion of maybe a particular style of talking that teachers want to see, and children being told they cannot use certain language or they cannot speak in a certain way. And you may see posters on classroom walls that say, do not use these words, do not speak like this, this is not good practice. And we see this kind of what they call language policing. And you think, okay, that's a really sort of interesting concept, but it is really sort of what happens, I think, people being told they can't do things. And so I think that's also kind of findings that we have from some of these multinational companies.
Another theory from your experience that how do you think multilingualism can be promoted in education?
So I think there are some, we've been talking a little bit about this too, so I think there's some big changes that could happen at kind of, policy, and we need people in government and in all levels of government to be interested in that and committed. As you said, Nepal has really interesting policies, doesn't it? It has quite progressive policy. And I was really interested in during our study because the policy is really different to that of other countries in many ways. So it's there sometimes at the policy level, but what happens in practice isn't always the same as what the policy says. So the point at which policy and practice meet, I think, is an interesting one. So there's some big structural changes, but I think also really small, easy things in classrooms can happen. So we've been talking about, if the teacher is giving clear encouragement to students to use other languages, are students encouraged to work together, to speak together, to write in other languages, to use other languages? If we have material in the classroom, is it all in one language? So even though we may think, we operate multilingually, there's often messages that go to the students that tell them one language is better in a school environment than another. So if we're conscious of those things, I think people talk about an idea of like called a monolingual habitus. And this idea of habitus, in very simple terms, is kind of how you do things. So it's like a habit. So we're in the habit, I think, of running classrooms in a particular way. So I think if we can make these small changes to the way that we do things, giving space on worksheets for multiple languages to be used, not necessarily putting English on posters, but giving the space for other languages to be present in that kind of what we might say the landscape of the classroom.
So, in the context of Nepal, if we see there is a drastic change in language policy,
yes,
especially the change occur after 1990s political change. Before it, there was assimilation language policy, one language, one nation, one country, one political system that is based upon Nepali too, and for international that English was there. But after that, the policy has been, as you already noticed, that Nepal's language policy is written in the constitution of Nepal is very much progressive.
Yes,
but it's still, we people are suffering with multilingual policy and monolingual mindset. So what do you think about it?
I think that's exactly the problem in a way. That's the real issue, isn't it? So I think it is in schools. I think often in communities, I think parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles have an idea that even if they don't know those terms in the same way. So if I'm sure my grandmother, for example, doesn't use the term monolingual mindset, but she would know what it is. She has that learning. She's been told in schools that the way she speaks or sounds is not, it's not standard. So I think people get that. So I think there does have to be things programs to change that. So trying to engage with communities to sort of say, actually, this is a really positive thing. This is really good. That it is really healthy to have these different languages, to be able to use them. We were discussing yesterday as well about how there's interesting research coming out in kind of psycholinguistics or where language studies of the brain look at the connection between diseases like Alzheimer's, and so for what's called like early onset Alzheimer's, so the age at which you might get Alzheimer's, there seems to be emerging patterns where people who are multilingual have the age of onset, so the age at which you may get this disease tends to be later in life for multilingual adults than it does. Even there is a biological advantage to this, and let alone everything else. So we think, okay, if those kinds of practices happen, then if we can change some of that sort of thinking. But I think it is, it does require governments to change some of the way that they think about what nationalism is in a way, or what a nation is and how it can be and how that can be multilingual. And certainly, I can't obviously speak for the government in Nepal or the UK, but in the UK context, that's a really interesting question for us as well. We don't really, in England anyway, we don't necessarily at the government level have conversations about how diverse the population is to the benefit of the nation, and how good this is. I think it happens sometimes in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland because they have different kind of languages there. But these are still conversations that we need to be in the habit of doing. Okay,
coming back to Dr. Poudel, I think you have worked with British Council, Nepal government, and so many other projects. And we are also working with a project funded by University Grant Commission too. So what's going on?
That's a good question. Thank you very much. I know for a couple of years since I completed my PhD, I got a chance to get involved with different stakeholders, basically the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, which has CEHRD section there, and UNESCO Language Commission, and other, even UGC that we were working together. As Tracey also mentioned, we have a very much progressive language policy since the political change, right? But still, the same thing is that our bigger commitments, we made very big commitments, and these bigger commitments are taking time to go to the realization of those commitments. Yeah. So we have said, for example, let's go to the Bagmati province. They have said, I think last year, they declared that Newar, Nepal Bhasa, and Tamang, these two different other languages, will be co-official languages alongside of Nepali, right?
Yes.
But if you go to the practice, I think their offices do not have these two languages as required.
Yeah.
And then even in the schools, these languages have not been taught. And even in the municipalities, they are not working with those languages. So our commitments and our actions are not matching that much. Yeah. But in the education sector, of course, there are more fundamental works are going on. For example, in CHRD, after our project, CHRD, in partnership with British Council, they developed the multilingual education guideline. And they also developed multilingual education pedagogy packages for teachers. So they have trained teachers to do multilingual practices. They have trained teachers to develop their awareness about the value of multilingualism. So that particular monolingual or kind of bilingual mindset then had changed over a period of time. But this initiative is not reaching to the people in general. It's reaching to some people. And there's a huge section of teachers or people in the education sector who are still not aware of the value of multilingualism. So in our research, we indicated that a few percentage of government officials were aware of this multilingual education practice. So if you are not aware of, you will not do some action, right? Your actions will be constrained because of your limitation in awareness. So a lot of things are still to be done, but some of the things are going on, like development of resources for teachers training and training some teachers to do multilingualism at the government level. Yes. And at the other institutional level, for example, university level, me, and other people, they're working together to develop to support policies to realize this particular multilingual ideology of the state. In general, I know Nepal has the multilingual ideology. As a state now, it already has multilingual ideology because it is already mentioned in the constitution. Everyone has the right to educate their children in their languages, and everyone has the right to protect and promote their languages. This is there. So ideologically, the whole state is multilingual state. But
by overall policy too.
Policy. But when it comes into practice, my actions, your actions, her actions, everyone's actions are more monolingual. I think this is a kind of legacy that we are carrying on since then. And sometimes people say, oh, parents don't want to do multilingual on something. I think it's not the fault of the parents because it's a social construct, right? The overall social construct has given values to certain dominant languages, and there is no choice for parents. You give jobs if you have better English, you give jobs if you have better Nepali, then why should parents opt for that language? So it has to have an utilitarian value. Every language should have the functional value, right? So that it can work, it can continue in the society. So I think a lot of other things are to be done, but we still have seen a good, good points going on, good emerging scenarios there. And educators like you, me, researchers, I think we are responsible for this. How you advance this agenda further to communicate with the people, to understand the value of multilingualism. For example, Tracey said, this multilingual... being multilingual has biological values, benefits.
Of course.
Being multilingual has sociological influence. Like we published one paper in language conflict, right? So the more multilingual classroom situations are there, the less the conflict. And conflict doesn't mean you fight. Conflict means a kind of enmity creation in the classroom, right?
Yeah.
So multilingual students had less enmity, and they had more chances of creating more harmony across students in the classroom than monolingual ones, because they could not communicate their, their thinkings to other people. So we did one study in Kathmandu, and we found that, and it has been published. So these are the things going on. We are working, and people are working. So how to bring them in the front is one of the important things.
I guess one thing that we need to be very serious about, that the policies are always there. And policies are always positive and progressive in our context. But there is lack of the management of the policy. So the project that we have started through UGC, the multilingual management of Nepal's linguistic diversity. He noticed that Language Commission recommended 11 official languages to the 7 provinces of the country. And the bill has already passed, especially for the Bagmati province, where Nepal Bhasa or Newar and Tamang has already been declared the official languages. But still, there is no management, there is no awareness, and people are not very much interested about it in practice. And I think we need to think it very seriously about it. This is our job.
I think I would like to add something on that. There are a lot of misconceptions working around. Like yesterday also in Language Commission we had a talk, and there's people were saying that there were multilingual pilot schools and they stopped the program. The problem was people thought that in a multilingual school they are only teaching the native languages, other ethnic languages. But it was not the case. They were teaching English, they were teaching Nepali, they were teaching other languages together, right? And the other languages was the medium because the children were from those language backgrounds. So overall perception was that people thought that, okay, this is only Newar school, this is only Rajbamsi school, this is only Tharu school. So people did not trust like that. So I think we have to unfold this particular mindset that is created in relation to multilingualism, so that we can go ahead.
So if I ask the same question, why this is so?
Yeah, I think there's lots of these terms and these, as you said, this idea of the social construct is really powerful and has been in power for a really, really long time. And so the kind of, I think, is it Bourdieu, maybe, or even Foucault even, who talks about this idea of, symbolic violence and kind of the ways in which languages in particular seem to be valued or not valued, and then by association people, like historically I think we see these kinds of patterns where languages like English, for example, have through often real force and real kind of aggressive force. It's not even sort of a gentle force, like horrible ways in which English has made its way around the world. And how that as a system is replicated or duplicated, even if we're not aware of that. So, I'm conscious of people like myself, for example, in the type of teacher training that I had to teach English. And, at the time, I think I was quite young, and I did my training, and then I went to go and teach in Thailand, and I thought that was wonderful. And it was wonderful, and it was a real privilege. But I look now at that and think, what kind of privilege is that? It's very much a white privilege. I recognize that, essentially, I think at the time, again, I was quite young, and I think I tried to be a good teacher, and I think I have tried to be a good teacher since then. But I think if I'm really honest, I think I probably only had that job because I have a British passport, I had an English background, and because I had sort of, white skin. I think that's really what probably got me my jobs. And that's really, it's important, I think, for people, like me to also recognize that too, that, how we're parts of systems that we also then have inherited, and you inherit kind of things, but also the requirement to change that as well. So so I think, again, if I think back to the type of teaching I did when I first started, so my first job was in schools in Thailand, and we were really very much the mindset there of, so this was the late 1990s, and the training there was really the target language through the target language. So teach English through English, and that's it. No use of other languages. And at the time I thought,
so target to target, not from source to target.
Yes. And you think, okay, this is interesting. And you don't always question everything, do you, in the way that you think. And then, of course, when I arrived in the classroom, it was really different, and kind of, I remember, in our training we were told to, it was a very much communicative language teaching, so have small groups, students working together, TPR, so total physical response was also something that was quite fashionable at the time as well, so get people up and moving around. And so of course when I went to my first class, I think there were 60 students in the class, and on rows of tables that you couldn't move the table. And so I tried to move and the teacher who was also monitoring the class was like, what are you doing? Like, you can't move the children in this way, like they have to stay. And so it was a really interesting, not a battle of, but I think that's where I was very aware that I was coming with a very different set of ideas and practices, and that negotiation, I think, was really important. So how we negotiate through these, because I think it's not always people like me or these kinds of systems, but you find yourself often against something, don't you? So teachers try to be innovative, but they don't have the resources. Or teachers try to be innovative, but the parents might not want that. Children try to do something, and so trying to find those points at which things constrain people, particularly around multilingualism, I think. But there are lots of invested people in it, aren't there? There's lots of money involved in education, isn't there, as well? So I think there was a figure there's a terrifying amount of money that was involved in, say, for example, English language teaching as a global industry. And you think, okay, and I'm not saying that people are bad or people are inherently bad people, but there's money to be made from English only, isn't there, I think? So until even very cynically, if you can change that to there's money to be made from multilingual materials, then I think, so it's again those things, like who has the power? So identifying those spaces and perhaps sort of challenging some of that, but also finding the right things that people will listen to. So we've also had conversations about this, and what evidence do people need in order to be convinced that these changes should happen and are good and are beneficial? So, what do people listen to? So that's always a kind of an interesting thing as well, I think. But this kind of inheritance of things, like how we kind of try and change that, I think is, as Prem said, this is part of the work that we are, I think, committed to trying to do and trying to find ways of doing that. So our own classroom practices, for example, how do we sort of live some of these ideas, I think is also really important.
So if I ask, what is your research in Nepal right now?
So right now we are, based on the project that Prem and I were doing before, and I felt really lucky to have been involved in that because it was really interesting, and it's really, it's great to be able to, again, see the uniqueness of Nepal's context, but equally how it's similar to that, like it is a kind of a global phenomenon, isn't it? That people are really struggling to find ways through this. And I think what's interesting as well is, the types of responses that we can make. So in, building on some of the recommendations that we made in the project, we were then able to have some small funding from Essex to then try and take forward some of the ideas from the report. So we've been working on looking at promoting multilingualism in schools, and one way that we've been doing that is through kind of a story competition and using multilingual stories. So the plan, our intention is to then produce a multilingual storybook. So where one thing that I think, again, and this comes back to, how do you make these changes, is, we see common languages. We see languages commonly in print. And you see Nepali in print, for example. You see English in print, for example. But how often do you see Tamil languages, for example, in print? We have similar, challenges in other contexts as well. So colleagues in Africa were also saying the same thing. You don't see books published in other African languages. The big ones you might find, but the smaller regional language, not so much. So there's no value. Those languages are easier to be kind of removed. They're not so important. So one of the things we were trying to do there is, if we use stories as a genre, does that allow us space to do something? So the idea is that we would have, multiple languages in one storybook. And I've seen one book similar to this when I was in Taiwan, where they have the story, and there's an indigenous language is the main language of the story. So that's the bigger font. And then next on the same page is Chinese, and then next at the bottom is English. And I thought, this is really interesting, because you see books where they might be, English or Nepali only.
I think this support with the trans-language in pedagogy as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And so you think, okay, well, so with this we have at the moment 4 languages that we're working with in the book, which is really wonderful. So thinking of the sequence, like what languages would come first, and what message does that tell people? But regardless of that as well, the types of activities you can do with that. So not only is it sort of, working on kind of language development and literacy practices by writing these stories, by using other languages to write the stories, translation, all of those kinds of practices. But then once you have it, then you can continue to promote different types of skills, couldn't you? So in terms of language teaching, if you have these 4 languages on the same page, you could do lots of really interesting classroom activities on that, can't you? Like looking at finding words, finding structures within those 4 languages, using classmates to help read, to help write, taking the book home, engaging family members with that, reading the page. But it just a really, I think they're quite sort of, stories are always kind of complicated and they're complex, aren't they? But they're also quite simple, and they're quite sort of nice spaces to work in, I think, because they're not so threatening. So you can involve family members in that, I think, and that's an easier way for parents, for families to be involved in schooling, but also to see those languages as well.
Yes,
because I think one of the things we found in our project and also in other projects is that I think, not all families, and that's fine, but most families really want to be involved in their children's education in some way, in whatever way they can. They want to feel useful, then they want to feel part of it. So, to try and include them in that way, I think is really important. So that's what we've been working on most recently.
So, Prem, did you notice any memorable episode while collecting the data or working with that, even the students while preparing that multilingual text?
Yeah, there are a lot of amazing things coming up, right? I told yesterday also in the beginning, one of the students was so hesitant to write a story, right? And then in the beginning we said, okay, write a story in English or Nepali. We didn't say write in Tamil. Then later we found that the child was not, that lady was not that interested, and we told that, okay, why don't you write a story in Tamil?
Yes.
And she said, I'll try. And then what she did is she went home, talked to her parents.
That's brilliant.
And maybe she listened to a story from different sources, we don't know. But she brought a very nicely written story of her own life. Yeah. Right? And she has a very amazing story coming in her language. So what we mean is, she had that potential, right, of writing, regardless of the language, right? Yeah. So she was afraid of writing in Nepali, or she thought that she would not be bringing a good piece in Nepali or not in English. But when we connected this particular text with her valued language, and she created, and later she was so excited, and she is going to translate other stories as well into Tamil. So see, this is how children already have a lot of resource. and capabilities. So if you give them chance to promote their capabilities or use their capabilities, I think there are great creations.
Yeah.
Right? Even teachers are also doing, in our earlier project, what happened is we say teachers don't know those languages, so that's why they don't do multilingualism. But we went to Far West in one of the schools. There was a
easy
teacher.
way to escape from the difficulty.
Yeah, and then one of the teacher was like using 3 different languages in the classroom, and while she was using English, children were calm. While she was using Nepali, still calm. And when she was using the Tharu language, Sana Tharu language there, words from that language, everyone was so excited and they were raising hands, you know. So, you should not think education and achievement or learning just in quantities, just in achievement scores. I think their participation is also learning.
Yes,
Their happiness is also learning. Their excitement, their motivation is learning. So I think very interesting things that teachers can do, and very interesting things that students can also do if we give them spaces for them to use their resources that they have. So in the research, I think we found many other exciting experiences, right? And then we need to also document these good practices, because we usually say, oh, this is not working, it doesn't work, something like that. But I think there are some examples where good practices are going on, right? And this multilingual story writing practice, or even other multilingual poem, for example, if we create those, I think that will also connect the children with their families. And I think there are other associated benefits like school community connections.
Really
Maybe
important.
you never know, we have not tested, but the parent who supported the child to write the story is already happy enough to come to school. So it might have another parental engagement benefit in the schooling system, and that ultimately will promote learning, because our primary goal is to promote students' learning. So these things can promote their learning, and they will be processing in their language and at least expressing those things into the other language if they are literate. So I think instead of going from English or other foreign language or Nepali to their mother tongue, I think starting from mother tongue and then processing to another language, I think there will be much more benefit, and maybe even the learning will be quicker. Right? So
one reality in the context of Nepal, that we realize that people think about their mother tongue or their heritage language or the home language is the main agenda for multilingual education. Why this is so? I mean, why the people haven't realized the value of this multiplicity of languages?
I think this is again an ideological problem, because we could not educate them about this, or they could not understand. They didn't want to understand. So multilingual education is not mother tongue monolingual education. So you cannot understand multilingualism from monolingual perspective. If you understand, there's a problem. For example, if you let's say you want to do multilingual, but you print books in single language, you speak one language at a time, you do one language at a time. Again, this is not multilingual. So being multilingual is being fluid across languages. This is what we are talking about, translanguaging, right?
Most of the textbook printed by the government in Nepal are the same.
And another problem, another problem in the community is that people might think, if I learn Newar, I might have bad Nepali or bad English. I think this is not the case.
Yes, not at all.
This is not the case. You see, Nepalese boys, they are learning Korean language in 6 months. And they are learning through Nepali,
for sure.
You have examples. So why you create the kind of discourse that learning this particular language hampers this? Of course not. If you are just very normative, maybe there are some problems in pronunciation or something else. But if you think language as a medium of communication, then whatever language you communicate, you use and communicate the message fluently, that's enough.
Absolutely.
Right? When I speak Nepali, I mix English words, and nobody cares that much, right? So we have to create an environment that all languages are respected. Valued and work together.
Absolutely.
I think this is what
if I ask the same question to you.
So I think, and to follow on from what Prem was saying as well, I think where you have a system where, and it's great, we have multilingual education, but it's often always confined to a certain stage of education. So in the primary sector, we would have kind of these other languages are there, and that's really important, and it's about foundational learning. But then there's a switch at kind of, secondary level, whatever, where, there might be a move into either a particular language. We saw this a lot in the projects that we're working in the different African contexts. So also that says a clear message as well, doesn't it? Yeah. These languages are valued for a certain period of time, and then once you progress through school, they become less valuable. Yeah. And that also is an odd situation, isn't it? Like, why, if we're committed to multilingualism as a kind of mechanism for education and as a kind of a product or a feature of classrooms, then that should also be the same through secondary, through universities. But I think what we also see is that, most, I mean, imagine in kind of most Nepal universities have a specified medium of instruction, don't they? It's probably either going to be Nepali or English. And so parents, children, students will see that and think, okay, well, there's no real... Well, they might then ask themselves, well, what's the value in me continuing to sort of feel really busy doing all of this stuff because, by the time I have to have this other stuff in order to be successful at university. So I think there's a kind of a downward pressure, isn't there? So you see that at nursery even, because, parents want the best for their children and they want the best advantages they can have and, the most success that they can have in their lives. So, people think, well, if universities if jobs require everything to be done in English or in other specific language, then why would I bother, investing? And so that's where I think you get markets for, English medium instruction, nursery schools, and you see it happening all the way through. And you think, okay, well, actually, if you change what happens at the top of the system as well, does that also have, there's less pressure on people to kind of fall into that monolingual position if the whole journey is expected to be done in the same way. I remember a comment from one of the colleagues who was we interviewed as part of the project, and they said, it's really interesting if you see government jobs advertised in Nepal, you see it would be, English and Nepali would be ideal languages, but there's never a requirement for a call or a suggestion in the job advertisement that other languages would be really a benefit as well. And so the colleague, I think he was saying, well, actually this type of, it needs to be in there, doesn't it, that actually promoting the use of languages, so multilingual workplaces as well. And that was definitely something in the projects for in the Zambia, Tanzania and Botswana project, where we could see parents would talk about that as well, where there was mixed feelings about the work pressure, but they felt that their children, if they were being educated in English only, it would help them in their job or it would make their jobs more difficult. So there wasn't a unified opinion on it, which you would sort of expect. But that's also interesting, like where, again, kind of in these areas that also exert pressures on the education system, that they also need to be part of these discussions as well. Or, the messages that come down sort of even implicitly within the education system. So something we're trying to do with, in terms of like academic publications, there's lots of things around, English, a lot of kind of work publishing. Like, why is that? Like, and again, so trying to make changes for that. So trying to get publishers to publish things multilingually. So again, those kind of making those changes. So we're lucky at the moment to be working with a publisher in the UK who anyway, but Multilingual Matters. So, their name suggests this, doesn't it? So we contacted them about a publication from the projects in those African contexts and said, we would like to do a multilingual book. And they were like, oh, what? And we sort of said, well, this is how we would like to do this. We would like to have, different languages in the writing of the text to represent the colleagues we're working with, the context we're working. It shouldn't all be it can't all be in English. Like, it would be inappropriate for what we're trying to do. And so they said, well, and we said, look, you're the only publisher we think, just in your name alone. And so they came back and said, actually, you're right. We should be trying to do this. It is new to us. It's not something we've done before, but it's something we're very willing to try. So again, I think that type of thing where, again, the habit, it's not that there's anything inherently superior about English as a form of communication for academic knowledge. It's not that at all. It's just the structure that's been created, isn't it? So if we can dismantle that, so I think those kinds of things, I think are exciting in a way to try and push for that and change that. But I think it also means that things inherently then become more collaborative, which I think is also a good thing because, again, I think we've also had kind of historic practices where things are really done in the singular, always mono something. Yeah. It's one researcher, it's one. And I think, again, changing that culture, so working more in teams, working more in international collaborations, because you need that for understanding, don't you? It's impossible and I think this is why it was really nice to work, with you on these projects as well, is that, you obviously have really just wealth of local knowledge and understanding, which I will never have. I could spend the rest of my life in Nepal and still not have that. Yes. Yeah. So, but you think again, I also bring something different to that project. So again, you have more than the sum of your parts. The combining, I think, is really important. Yeah. Yes. So you get this kind of collaboration and more multi than the kind of mono. Yeah.
So we are at the end of the program. What are your future plans?
Future plans, yes. So I think we were talking about looking at trying to find funding or opportunities for further projects in Nepal in particular. So looking at trying to see through again some more of these kinds of projects. So once we get the multilingual book, like what kind of impact is that having? Are students using it? Is it what other kind of projects can happen as a result of that? Looking at ways that we can, again, kind of work with teachers. So one of the things that I think is really interesting, isn't it, is what needs to happen in order for change to take place. So it seems like often, and I understand how this happens, and of course in education you want things to be effective and you can't take too many risks with people's education. It's really important, isn't it? But also things take time, don't they? And things take time to develop. So there has to be a commitment to seeing something happen, but seeing it happen in its full form. So I think for me, a natural next step and something that really constrains teachers is assessment. So how do we, because again, if you're looking at sort of multilingual practices in classrooms, which we see and we know that happens. From that project, we were really confidently able to say there are no real monolingual classrooms. Are there? They just don't happen. There may be moments where there's one language being used, but ultimately there's all kinds of language happening all the time. But when it comes to kind of formal assessment and when it comes, again, that message of what's important and what's valuable, I think sort of summative or formal national testing is really part of that, isn't it? That's where, because it's a national examination or it's a formal exam, so it has that power, doesn't it? It has the credibility. Yeah. So if those practices continue to remain monolingual, then I think that keeps people very much in it's a kind of a straitjacket almost, isn't it? It's a really confining thing. So trying to find ways to change that, I think, would be really important.
So, Prem, do you have any further plans as you noticed?
Yeah, I think we actually in the mind we have a lot of plans. Like materialize this is very important. And as Tracey said, and that also came out of her early research that, assessment system has been a kind of gatekeeping matter. Yeah. Either in terms of getting students in or letting students go.
Yes.
So yesterday we went to another school, and the school, this is a multilingual school, has all these multilingual things going on in the school system, but they take the entrance examination only in English. Yeah. So meaning that those students who do not have good English are poor students. This is the message that school is sending, right? Yeah. And we were talking with the head teacher, and he was saying that they might change this entrance system into 2 different languages,
amazing,
not only English. So you bring them in, good people, you bring them in and improve their English. That's okay.
Yes. Yeah.
But if you just control people because they don't have English, that might be a kind of another problematic situation that you're creating.
Absolutely,
So I think in the future we might be working on those things to create more awareness in because we had a workshop and all teachers were aware of, and even head teachers said, okay, he would love to do that, right? So that is what he was just reflecting. So I think we need to reach to the lower level who are the actual actors of this language policy. So this is what we can do, and building on what is coming out of this story project, we'll have a story in 4 different languages. So teachers might need to understand how the story can be used as a resource to support learning. Right, and so this might be another work that we can try to look at, and then even assessment system. I think if we want, it's not that complex, right? You can use a technology. For example, if you give one question in English, okay, and why don't you give one option there where the people can understand in their languages on the side, in the computer, right?
For sure.
So there's a question mark, and you click there, you see languages, and you just click that language and understand that thing, and again answer in English. That's okay. Answer in Nepali. That's okay. I think so. Blending this technology in these multilingual matters, because AI is doing a lot of things for us, right? So why don't we use that resource to create that kind of platform so that assessment can be more equitable, more justifiable, and more to the people who are not strong enough in one particular language. I think we need to look for those options in the future, and of course collaboration, bringing things from across the world and
collaboration,
working together. So this is also one of the collaborative works that we are doing, and we are creating an awareness, right?
Absolutely.
So
and it's exciting to be able to go and do these things.
It's very nice to be here with you too.
Yes, thank you.
In a panel, in a different version of Bhasaka Kura, and hope that this discourse has generated a kind of new awareness to the people about the misconception of realizing multilingualism and its value too. Hope we will be able to meet again in the similar discourse in the days to come. And I wish you a better journey.
Thank you.
Because you are living this
evening.
And on behalf of this radio and our technicians, Vishnu, Supriya, and others, thank you very much
Thank you so much.
Coming to our studio and expressing your opinions. And thank you very much to Prem, because I'm inviting Prem once again to one common Nepali program.
Thank you.
Brilliant, yes. And thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to be here today and to work with you and these ongoing conversations as well. It's a real honour.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you for the team for coordinating with all these things. Okay.